Tonight, border at the forefront.
Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
This as European countries fight border crises of their own.
We're becoming kind of like the border agency for the entire EU.
Plus, President Biden's virtual meeting with his Chinese counterpart. And the Great Resignation hits the church.
It's now 2 out of 5 pastors who say they're seriously considering quitting. It's the highest we've ever seen.
Pastors quitting in the middle of the pandemic. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The Secretary of Homeland Security once again in the hot seat on Capitol Hill. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. From Afghan refugees to gun violence and cybersecurity, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas faced tough questions when he appeared before the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee today, but the main focus was on the crisis at the southern border.
Yeah, and it got heated. Republicans grilling him on enforcement of U.S. immigration law, the increase of illegal immigrants crossing into the country, and factors they believe are encouraging migrants to come. National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke followed today's hearing.
Secretary Mayorkas acknowledged that the number of migrants illegally crossing the border was extremely low during the Trump administration, and that since Biden took office, the number has been historically high. Still, he maintains Trump policies broke the system, and that those put in place by the Biden administration, combined with legislation, will fix it.
We must invest in addressing root causes, creating legal pathways, and ensuring swift adjudication of asylum claims. The immigration system, though, is fundamentally broken, a fact that everyone agrees upon. Congress must pass legislation to fix it.
Republican lawmakers, however, say it's lack of enforcement that has migrants flooding into the U.S.
Between January 1st and September 30th of this year, so just the time period in which President Biden has been in office, there have been about 1.7 million illegal crossers that have been encountered at our southern border. And so this doesn't suggest to me operational control.
Senator, we are enforcing the laws that Congress passed. Individuals who make a claim for asylum, who are encountered upon illegal crossing at the border, are placed into immigration enforcement proceedings, are able to make their claim for asylum before an immigration judge, and if their claim is successful, under the law, they are able to stay here. If their claim is unsuccessful, then they are removed from the United States.
Mayorkas called migrants who fail to report an enforcement priority, saying they would not be able to simply disappear into the United States. He stressed that point frequently after several media reports cited leaked immigration documents that some lawmakers believe contradict DHS enforcement policy. One document allegedly reads, quote, "Don't worry if you're past the 60-day deadline to report from the time you entered the United States. Come in so you can help ensure the best outcome for your case."
We have limited resources, and if we do not establish priorities, we will not accomplish our mission most effectively of securing the well-being of the American public.
Democratic lawmakers largely stayed away from border security during the hearing. And while Mayorkas was in the line of fire, it was clear that Republicans hold the White House responsible for the border crisis. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Here with us now is Courtney Trevino with Texas Latino Conservatives. Courtney, thanks for joining us on Faith Nation tonight. As you heard and saw in Caitlin's piece, things got pretty heated on Capitol Hill. Secretary Mayorkas grilled about America's immigration laws. Courtney, do you think the Biden administration is doing enough to enforce the laws on the books?
Well, thank you guys for having me. It's definitely an honor. So grateful to be on here today. But I would ask, what is the Biden administration doing? Because it seems to me that it is a complete open border. People are able to walk straight through. There was just a reporter from New York down here who witnessed 60 to 70 people just walking straight through, and there was straight access from the U.S. to Mexico. Also, my dad, he is an ICE agent. I've worked in immigration my whole life, and you know the policies have completely changed. They used to be significantly vetted for multiple DWIs, and now they're having complete packed facilities, and they're being instructed to just clear them out. So whether they are apprehended or come in without being apprehended, they're essentially able to just walk straight through. And I think that the Biden administration is giving a message that the borders are open to continue coming through.
Yeah. Courtney, in terms of the coverage of this crisis, how bad is the crisis at the border? Is it worse than what's often reported?
Oh, definitely. You know, in South Texas, I don't think we're given an accurate representation of exactly what is happening. Anybody can come down here to the bus station, for instance, in McAllen, and you'll see a group of individuals with no luggage, nothing but an envelope, which is their papers. So they are just crossing here, but they're not staying here. This is just their entry point to get to their destination of where they're going.
Courtney, regardless of fault and who's to blame, the U.S. immigration system does appear to be broken. Is there a way for Republicans and Democrats to come together and compromise on some sort of comprehensive immigration reform law? Is there some way to get there in about a minute or less, if you can?
Definitely. So, you will come across people who have expressed frustration, who have gone through the process to come to this country legally. Yes, it is a lengthy process, and yes, it can be shortened. And so I think it just takes the right people in office to have those discussions, who represent so that way your community has true representation. For instance, Myra Flores is running for Congress in South Texas. She's a legal immigrant, came to the United States at the age of 6 with the help of her father. And, you know, she understands wholeheartedly what happens to these children on their journey. I used to work in an immigration facility, and it's very dangerous of traveling from Central America to the United States. So it is a discussion that needs to be talked about. It needs front coverage, and it just takes the right people to get that awareness out there. So thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having someone who lives down here. We experience it, and it's definitely not talked about enough.
All right, Courtney Trevino, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, the Great Resignation plaguing the nation is now reaching into America's churches on an alarming level.
That's right. New numbers released today showed 2 out of every 5 pastors nationwide are seriously considering leaving the work of the ministry. CBN's Brody Carter spoke with a leading pastor and analyst who's calling for all church members and Christian leaders to step up their support. Brody.
John, Jenna, according to the Barna Group, the country's foremost researcher of all things religious, it's the highest number they have seen of pastors leaving or seriously considering stepping down from the pulpit. Now the pressure's on the church to help these leaders from joining the millions walking away from their jobs during the pandemic.
Pastors are people too, and so they're certainly showing some of the same kinds of things that others are doing in our society, which includes this consideration of just quitting, doing something different.
Thinking about quitting your job? Your pastor could be as well.
It's now 2 out of 5 pastors who say they're seriously considering quitting. It's the highest we've ever seen.
While studying trends in the church, Barna Research took a deep dive into leadership. That's when they found this red flag. 38% of pastors want to quit now, compared with 29% in January.
During and after the pandemic, about a third of practicing Christians had disengaged from their congregation, just sort of stopped showing up.
Here are other concerns to consider. More than 4,000 churches closed in America in 2020. Over that same time period, more than 20,000 pastors left the ministry. On top of that, 50% of current pastors say they would leave the ministry if they had another way of making a living. So what's the deal?
Pastoring is incredibly difficult without a pandemic, right? You add on top of that the amount of interpersonal conflict that is taking place.
Dr. Dwayne Bond is a counselor and pastor at Wellspring Church in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I've just walked with a lot of men, and so bearing their burdens, it created incredible amounts of weight upon me, which is what God has called me to.
The pandemic also caused churches to remain closed for months at a time, which led to financial constraints for some. Now, continuing political strife over masks and vaccines are becoming a breaking point for many congregations.
There's different opinions. Everyone has an opinion, and it creates exhaustion and disunity. And I would just encourage every pastor to consider having ventilating relationships, but also potentially even grabbing a counselor and kind of working through some of these things versus being forced to do it.
Dr. Bond sees this season of suffering as an opportunity for the church to provide support and hope for those dedicated to feeding our spiritual lives.
When you think about it, when the book of Acts, when affliction came, the church really exploded, right?
The pandemic, I think the long-term effect of it is going to really be a stronger church, but probably a smaller church.
Dr. Bond went on to say healing in the church begins with leaders, such as elders or deacons. He also recommends teaming up with other churches to give pastors a break, adding church leaders should never be ashamed for seeking counsel during difficult times. John, Jenna, back to you.
All right, Brody, thank you. Well, after a virtual summit between President Biden and President Xi Jinping of China, the two global powers appear to agree on one thing, both voicing opposition against a new Cold War.
To me, our responsibility as leaders of China and the United States is to ensure that the competition between our countries does not veer into conflict, whether intended or unintended. Just simple, straightforward competition.
The president and his Chinese counterpart sought to reduce simmering tensions in a 3-hour virtual meeting last night. Afghanistan, North Korea, Iran, Taiwan, and human rights were among the topics they discussed.
Coming up, crisis at the border, and not the one you're probably thinking. How European nations are responding to their own immigration issues when Faith Nation returns.
Welcome back. Well, America is not alone in dealing with a growing crisis at its border. North African nations are weaponizing migrants against allies in Western Europe.
Chuck Colton traveled to Greece and Morocco to give us a first-hand look at the response in the European Union.
In Greece, 5 new holding camps are being built to the tune of almost $300 million. At the rate migrants are crossing into Greece from Turkey, however, no sooner will the camps be built than they will be full. The number of migrants entering Europe is up over 300% since last year. There are many other camps in Greece as well. I visited this one north of Athens, which holds more than 3,000 people from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Palestine.
This camp has been here for years, and it's really turned into kind of its own little city. It's got market, nice eggplants, very good. It's got all kinds of shops, barber shops, everything they need. The only thing that they really can't get here is a passport or a visa to allow them to leave.
The weakest point at the external border is the weakest point for everybody, and people will exploit this.
Europe has a new border force called Frontex, which lends assistance to countries as the number of migrants continues to swell.
It is the first time that a European agency has, or even the EU has, a uniform service. So our budget is growing. We have a lot more responsibilities. We are dealing with border crime. We're becoming kind of like the border agency for the entire EU.
With just more than 1,400 employees at the moment, Frontex is slated to hire up to 10,000 people by 2024, with the threat of terrorism being a key driver for growth.
There are security issues, and you have to, at the very least, you have to know who's crossing the borders. And that's the basic responsibility of any border guard organization, and certainly Frontex. We have to know who's coming in so that we can check them and screen them and then catch, potential security threats.
The central Mediterranean sea routes from Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya are especially worrisome, and especially so to the Italians and the Spaniards, who have seen quite a few terrorists come through on boats from those territories, along with larger, more benevolent refugee flows where they're camouflaging their way in.
I decided to fly from Greece to Morocco to get a look at the scope of this problem. For the millions of Africans who would love to make their way into Europe for a better quality of life, this is the narrowest point between the two continents. This is the Straits of Gibraltar. That's the Rock of Gibraltar right back there behind me. and it's only 8 miles from here to Europe. But there's an even closer way that they could cross into Europe and stay here in Africa, and that's by getting across this fence. That is all that separates Africa, Morocco in this case, from the enclave that belongs to Spain, which is a city called Ceuta. This tiny Spanish city of 80,000 has been hit hard with illegal crossings this year. At times, that number's been fomented by the Moroccan government as a way of punishing Spain over disagreements between the two countries.
9,000 people got, ended up in Ceuta, which is, it's a small place, and so most of them were sent back. But it showed again, like migrants being used as basically tools, let's say weapons for other issues.
Otman Bobo is an Algerian migrant who has already been deported from Spain twice. Still, he intends to keep trying to get in.
At 4:30 in the morning, we entered the sea. There were 2 guard dogs there that smelled us. The guards told us to stop, but we kept swimming directly to Ceuta.
While he was caught and sent back, the fact that he can make 10 times as much money on the other side of that fence is the reason he keeps trying.
I have a job waiting for me in the scrapyard, just over there. A friend who I was in prison with is holding it for me. I'm not afraid, never. I'm 35 years old, and I've got nothing. It's better to die, to be killed. 35 years old with no life. It's crazy.
But the threat of more terrorists infiltrating with migrants is very real.
In 2020, just for example, of the 10 successful kinetic attacks on the mainland, half of them, 5 of them, were conducted by migrants or people who came in as migrants. There's some thought that at least a few of them were sent in on purpose by ISIS's External Operations Division.
If you talk to a lot of groups here, anybody who's coming to Europe, is a refugee. No, I'm sorry, because most of the people that come are not refugees. They're economic migrants, and you can have specific ways of dealing with them. But there has to be a system. You can't just open the doors and let anybody else in.
From Morocco, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Up next, a decade after the promised Arab Spring, why so little has changed for religious liberty in Egypt.
Welcome back. When Egyptians took to the streets to demand freedom 10 years ago during the Arab Spring, many Christians had hoped it would usher in an era of religious freedom.
But as Jennifer Wishon tells us, for many on the ground, actually little changed.
Christianity has deep roots in Egypt, but for Christians living there today, their ability to practice their faith freely is tenuous. Meanwhile, the Jewish population has all but disappeared. And for more on this, we're joined by one of USERF's newer commissioners, Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum. Commissioner Kleinbaum, this almost seems like the tale of 2 Egypts. Give us a sense of some of the improvements that the nation has made in terms of honoring religious freedom.
We've seen in this last period of time, under this government, some attempts to make the world for Christians and other minority religions in Egypt a bit better. There have been different things that have been introduced, including some efforts to make sure that human rights are encoded in some kind of law, and we're really pleased to see those things.
President El-Sisi made a lot of news when he's kind of made it a tradition to attend Christian services at Christmas time, at Easter time, which, certainly a public show for support, right?
That's important, and we shouldn't undermine that. It's very important for the politically powerful to make the message to the masses, so to speak, to the people on the street, that he respects and sees those minority religions. Listen, I'm a rabbi, and Jews in Egypt have not done well. There were 100,000 Jews in Egypt in the 50s, and now there are less than 100. So I'm particularly sensitive to the need, and I care deeply about the situation for Christians in Egypt right now, and for the same fate not to happen to them. Yeah. And the only way that can be averted is if the international world if America, which has significant influence, and an organization, an agency like USERF pays very close attention.
I think, behind the symbolic, the reality is also that Egyptians still have to put their religion on their national ID. The blasphemy law is on the books.
Absolutely.
Sharia law, in principle at least, is still on the books. So what are the challenges, you guys?
Look at what's happening with detention right now in Egypt. So these challenges are very concerning to us, where there's a situation in which there's the powerful government, which is representing one religion as the state religion and makes the others at great risk. And notably, what's happening with the Copts and with other minority religions there is very concerning. And we know that the government uses the charge of spreading false information or spreading false news to arrest and detain journalists, human rights activists, religious people who they think are vulnerable to that. So we're very, very concerned about that.
Commissioner, I know, as is the case with many countries, Egypt is a strategic partner for the U.S. in the region. It receives more than $1 billion in U.S. tax dollar aid every year. How does this, I guess, play into it? What is USERF recommending?
And we're very concerned about that as well. And we know that this gives the U.S. a particular lever and a particular role to play, as well as it should highlight our concerns whenever we see there being charges of discrimination based on religion.
Commissioner Kleinbaum, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Blessings to you.
Blessings to you as well.
Coming up, fuel on the faithful. See how one D.C. church is sharing the gospel one pump of gas at a time.
Finally tonight, the season of giving is here, and one church in Northeast Washington, D.C. is meeting a very practical need.
The venue? A gas station. Greater Mount Calvary Church provided $20 worth of gas to nearly 250 cars, a project the church called Gas on God.
It's our giving season, and what better way to kick it off than to give gas on God.
For 3 hours Saturday, volunteers filled up tanks and hearts while also providing prayer and live music. Now, the good gesture, though, did have one negative drawback. It backed up traffic for 6 blocks. It's a program for the church to provide relief and assistance to those in need, and I'm not sure if I can find a better way that you could fuel holiday cheer. Sorry, it's
Absolutely. Get the ball rolling and, get them on the road.
Love it. Well, thank you for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great night.